Hey, this is Ryan, and you're listening to the Club Hunter podcast. I took a trip to Portland for 9 days, and I was inspired by The Storyteller, a 2021 memoir by Dave Grohl, where he narrated about his life and his musical experiences. I hadn't really listened to a ton of audiobooks, so this was refreshing. Compared to all the podcasts I usually listen to, it was immediately noticeable how different the vibe was with audiobooks. Right off the bat, the descriptive language he uses fully paints a picture of what he experienced, and his stories often brought a smile to my face. So as I was packing, I grabbed this little yellow notepad at the last minute, and on my trip, I just took bullet points each day. Those bullet points turned into a bit of a longer journal, and that journal turned into what I'm about to share with you now. I give you the Club Hunter Audiobook Experience. Saturday, June 1st, 2024. The first of many happy hours. On the direct flight up to Portland, I sat next to a couple about my age. The girl seemed nervous about flying, so her partner comforted her and reassured her, "It'll be a nice flight. We'll listen to some tunage, and we'll be there in no time." I listened to Dave Grohl tell stories of his youth on his audiobook while the couple next to me bobbed their heads to their selective tunes. As soon as I got off the plane in PDX, I could immediately tell the difference in the air. It was completely overcast, and there was moisture. It felt fresh. I could breathe easy. I walked by a cart that sold Blue Star donuts, and my jaw dropped to the floor because I remembered how good their donuts are, but I did not have enough time to stop for any bougie donuts. My dad picked me up, and on our way home, he stopped to pick up some fresh Oregon strawberries, and I got a moment to look out and soak in all the greenery and cloudy weather I had apparently taken for granted. I was amazed, as if I was just a tourist who hadn't grown up here my entire life, minus a couple years. Once we got home, I said hi to Dylan, and he informed me that he apparently took over my old room. It was always just a little bit bigger, so I understood. We turned on the TV in our living room, and we caught up with our favorite sets from EDC just last month. I hadn't seen any of Martin Garrix's, so we nearly watched the whole set nice and loud on their booming soundbar and subwoofer. We also talked a lot about Pokemon Go, since he had picked up the game again recently. We talked about game updates, upcoming events, we battled a few times, and even got some pretty sweet trades with one another. My dad had to pick something up from his shop, and I hadn't seen it yet since he started working there, so he invited me to come with and check it out. It's a stone's throw from the Costco warehouse I used to work at, and we could see firefighters training at the neighboring facility as they were practicing entering into a structure from the roof. Once we pulled into the lot with my dad's shop, I was impressed with how spacious everything was. Several offices and meeting rooms, lockers, showers, and a large garage with an insanely tall ceiling used for storing all kinds of equipment to care for Portland's numerous parks. Once we got what we needed, we went back to the house to figure out what the rest of the Saturday evening had in store for us. My mom was at a friend's house caring for her dog, but we all coordinated to meet up at Pub 181 for some classic happy hour action. Right up the street from our house, Pub 181 was a pretty frequent stop for my family. Travis also met up with us since he was now living close by. Turns out the daily special was Hornitos, so I had a few margaritas on the rocks. I got Dylan to talk about his job as a jailer since he had been there for over a year now, and I wasn't exactly sure what it was he did at work. He had told us stories of some wild criminals that have come in and how his department handles the occasional aggressive behavior. Travis showed up and told me he was now driving instead of working the warehouse manager position he was in last time I checked. I asked what happened with that job, and he said, "I got tired of firing people." I laughed and I said, "That should be the easy part." My mom arrived, and it quickly felt like what going to happy hour had always felt like. Reminiscing old times, poking fun at what's going on in the news, and lots of laughs. It wasn't long before our crew set up karaoke that was playing from a sound system directly behind us. My mom decided to try her luck at the slots while I incited the guys to play pool. There were 4 of us after all, so I paired up with my dad to challenge Dylan and Travis. I definitely needed the help as my dad carried the weight of our team. I played my best tipsy game of pool, but that only ended up with me giving those 2 a perfect shot at the 8 ball they needed to win. Maybe next time. We wrapped things up to head home, but I remembered Travis talking up this massive subwoofer in his truck, so without saying anything to the rest of my family, I went out the back door to ride with Travis and check out this badass sound system. I did what I often do when I notice someone's using Spotify as their streaming platform, which was taking their phone and looking up my own profile so they can have access to my music. I looked up some of the heaviest bass I could find through my Hornitos goggles. I hate to break it to you, Travis, but I've heard better, especially in my car. Everyone got back to the house after they realized I quickly dipped out for the 3-minute drive home. We settled in by Dylan's TV as he looked up the UFC fight that was going on live that night. We tuned in just in time to catch the last undercard fight, and during the intermission leading up to the main event, my mom took the fresh Oregon strawberries my dad bought earlier that day, got out the blender, and I got excited. That's right, it was time for blended strawberry daiquiris, a nice treat, while we watched Islam Makhachev versus Dustin Poirier. Poirier tried his hardest to throw some powerful hits while standing, but Makhachev ruthlessly brought Poirier to the ground any chance he could and trapped him in some holes that looked impossible to break from, giving Makhachev the win after a 5th-round submission by Poirier. To wind things down for the night, Dylan and I took turns playing Call of Duty until my eyes got so heavy it was time for some rest after my early morning flight and an eventful first day in Portland. Sunday. Bar hopping in the rain. I set an alarm to wake up Sunday morning, but like most days lately, I ended up waking up before the alarm. My objective was to pick up my rental car. I was certainly going to need it for the week. Sunday had the most rain out of my entire trip, and although we don't get a lot of rain in Vegas, I was glad it was only this much rain for one of the days during my visit. My dad and I got ready to leave, and he handed me a black hat that read Portland Parks and Recreation. We stepped outside, and I was instantly met with a nice drizzle. Nothing too crazy, but the hat definitely helped. We made our way over, and I was given a bright blue Nissan Altima, which ironically had Nevada license plates. What a coincidence. I hopped in, adjusted my seat, and immediately started playing with the stereo as I do with any rental car. The only problem is that both the 2 knobs, including the one for the volume, were both malfunctioning. Attempting to turn the volume up or down would take the levels way up or way down, and it was extremely jarring. So I figured at least I could use the buttons on the steering wheel. I was ready to make a right turn to head back to the house, but before I even left the lot, out of nowhere, this black car quickly came fishtailing down the road I was about to take, and for a split second, it seemed like they were about to drift all the way into my rental car. Thankfully, they sped right past me. The rain definitely played a part in this, but I honestly couldn't tell you if they were out of control or sliding around on purpose. Now that I had my sick blue whip, I got in touch with 2 of my good friends, Blakely and Liz. As we were making plans, we tossed around ideas of grabbing a drink or maybe even going to an arcade. So with those suggestions on the table, I knew a place we could make both of those happen and then some. I asked if we could meet up on Hawthorne, where we would have access to Quarter World and a few different bars to choose from. They agreed, and I made my way over to meet up with them. Our first stop was Angelo's, a nice little dive bar with pool tables and a neighboring restaurant that brought over some really good food. As soon as I stepped into the place, I smiled as I was hit with a wave of romantic nostalgia. That was because this bar was one of several places that Riley and I went on our first date, including Mount Tabor, Buffalo Wild Wings, and Quarter World. As always, it was such a joy to see Blakely and Liz. Our last visit was when they took a trip down to see Vegas for their first time, and before that was when Riley and I flew up for their wedding, where I was also the DJ. It was just us and a few others in the whole place, which was nice as we caught up and they had some food before we moved on to our next destination. Quarter World is always a fun atmosphere that has a good selection of games, spanning between 2 rooms with old school cabinets in the hallway between. Once we arrived, we kept the drinks flowing and we played all sorts of games. Pac-Man, racing, Jurassic Park, Mortal Kombat, pinball, and air hockey, just to name a few. We also happened to be in the room when they activated Tessie, the musical Tesla coil that uses electricity to create noisy music comparable to old 8-bit chiptunes from old video games. If you haven't seen or heard, it is extremely loud. Thankfully, the arcade provides earplugs, and on top of that, I always come prepared with a pair of my own fancy earplugs. Once we got our fix of arcade games, we made our way to a place that I hadn't been before called Bar of the Gods. What's nice about Hawthorne is that all of these bars and restaurants are within walking distance, which would be great for a sunny day. As we stepped outside, however, the rain was still coming down, and I automatically scrunched my face like I always would if I had to walk in the rain for more than 5 seconds. I swear, I grew up in Portland. It was a short walk to Bar of the Gods, and when we walked in, it was dark, very few people inside. Sometimes I like it better that way because it feels like we have the whole place to ourselves. We grabbed more drinks and we set up a game of pool. They even had a little whiteboard hung on the wall where I wrote who got stripes or solids. And I made up for my previous game of pool just the night before by getting the win against Blakely. Where was that skill and confidence at the pub with my family? I also noticed this deck of cards sitting on a shelf, but they weren't just ordinary playing cards. These cards all included trivia and riddles, some of which felt like novels just to read the clue. We all took turns pulling random cards to see if any of us could decipher the clues presented in these short stories, though in our state of mind, we were lucky if we could even solve one. Eventually, we just started looking at the correct answers and laughing at either how obscure or how ridiculously simple these answers were. Following our time at Bar of the Gods, Blakely and Liz were hungry for some food, so we walked over to another staple of Hawthorne, which was Por Que No. After some tacos and talking some more, we didn't exactly want our outing to end just yet, so we thought of other places we could go. Liz called the Moose Lodge, a membership-only club her and her family had access to see if they were still open. It was getting later on a Sunday evening, so they said they were pretty dead when we called. We decided to go check it out, but by the time we arrived, the doors were locked. As a last-minute backup, we thought of another small bar at a nearby strip mall to go to for one more game of pool, where Liz's brother Jarrett briefly joined us as well. We had a great time for the better part of our Sunday, but luckily for us, we had more time to hang out later that week, since we planned to meet up with Blake and Christina on Tuesday. For now, though, it was time to head home and to get some quality sleep for the rest of my eventful week ahead. Monday, an unexpected drive. I decided not to set an alarm since I didn't need to be anywhere in the morning, but I ended up getting one anyways. I had barely opened my eyes before I heard the sounds of children running outside to play, and one of them yelling, "It's not raining!" That's right, it was Monday, so the daycare was open for business, and I definitely didn't miss waking up to that. I wasn't mad though. It got me up around 9 o'clock, which meant I could go get myself some breakfast from McDonald's. One of my go-tos after a night of drinking if I was awake early enough. I rolled out of bed wearing some basketball shorts my mom had loaned me, and I asked her if she wanted anything before I made my way out. I got our breakfast. Now the last thing I needed was some electrolytes to rehydrate myself. I walked into Walmart, but then I realized they didn't have what I was looking for in their cold section, so I went on over to Safeway instead. I walked in, got some body armor, and went home. As soon as I got back, I said to myself, wait a minute, there's a hole in my shorts. I turned around to show my mom just to make sure, and there it was. Of course, I only noticed after I walked into 2 grocery stores, but we thought it was so funny. We laughed as we both agreed, that's pretty normal for around here. The rest of that morning into the early afternoon, my mom and I had our breakfast while we found ourselves absolutely chatting it up. We got on a roll talking about everything from religion and politics to the Middle East and conspiracy theories. It was the kind of conversation my mom and I have that flows so well we completely lose track of time. I didn't have any set plans for the day, but I knew either way I needed to get ready for the day. Right as I hopped in the shower, I got a call from my old friend Blake, not to be confused with Blakely, who I hung out with the day before. Great timing, but I thought there's no way I'm not going to answer after not seeing this guy for so long. We laughed for a moment as I answered the phone in the shower, and he invited me to come see his new house he was in the process of moving into. I said, sure, send me the address. He sends it to me while we're still on the call. I pulled up the map and I said, whoa, that's an hour and a half from me. Let me finish getting ready and I'll let you know for sure. His new place was just outside of Salem, so it would certainly be a trek to get down there. But I thought to myself, if I got a rental car, why not use it? I confirmed with him around what time I'd be there, grabbed my things, and I was on my way. Since it was a longer drive, it was a perfect opportunity to tune into more of Dave Grohl's audiobook, which made the time fly by. Combine that with the beautiful green overcast views along the way, I didn't mind the drive one bit. I pulled into the town of Almsville, population no more than 4,000 people. I parked my car, and Blake was standing on his balcony with 2 beers in hand, one for him and one for me. He gave me the tour around the place, which he explained is a modular home. They had just started getting the place ready a couple weeks prior, so there wasn't much inside other than a chair, some beers, and a can of white paint. This visit was already reminiscent of the time I helped him move out of one of his apartments in Gresham, where the place was also empty, and I decided it would be fun to host my 20th birthday party there. Needless to say, we don't need much to have a fun time.
You know, this is going to be much better. So we had a townhouse.
Yeah.
We had a townhouse apartment. This is about 1,500 square feet. Mm-hmm. Our apartment is 1,000 square feet.
Oh.
And
well, I haven't seen your guys' apartment up in Vancouver, you mean?
yeah, it's really small. So it's 2 stories. You have all 6 people. You have me, my wife, my 3 kids, bing, 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 and my mother-in-law, plus a dog, living in the size of this hardwood floor right here.
That's tight. I mean, at least for that many people.
Yeah, so it's going to be very nice.
When going from this to that, yeah, I could see that.
Oh, dude.
Yeah.
It's going to be night and day. Night and day.
At the time, Blake was working on painting several rooms around the house. He showed me what he had been working on that day, and later we decided it was time to go check out the town of Almsville, the town of which I had such a hard time remembering the name of, and I kept asking him, where are we? No, I keep wanting to say Auburn. We don't live in fucking Auburn. Almsville. Blake hadn't seen much of the town yet either, so we were both exploring some nearby bars for the first time. All of the places we visited down there had the small town, local dive bar look to them, and the first place we went to was no exception. The bartender was friendly, and once I said I was living in Vegas, she brought up stories from her latest Vegas trip. In my experience, it's always fun to bring up Vegas in conversation with strangers. Blake got some tots, and I got some exceptionally good curly fries that were easily a step up from Arby's. This place was nice, but we wanted to see what else Almsville had to offer. We went over to the downtown area, which was probably smaller than downtown Gresham for those that can picture the comparison. Very walkable. So we start walking down the sidewalk, and we notice this lady smoking a cigarette. We say hello, and Blake asks, "Where's the party at?" She points to the door beside her and says, "Right here. I'm the bar manager." We introduce ourselves, and Blake explains how he just moved into town, and then she invites us inside. We all walk up to the bar, and the manager introduces us to the bartender, but before we knew it, she asks her to pour us each the root beer drink. She pulls out 3 short glasses, one for me, one for Blake, and one for the manager. Then she tells us, "Since you're new here, we're all going to chug this, and the last one to hit their glass on the bar is a sissy. 3, 2, 1, go." Now, I wasn't paying close attention to what was in this drink, but I can definitely taste the root beer. Blake touched his glass to the bar first, and the manager barely beat me to it by a split second. I thought, oh great, here it comes. She pointed at me and said, "You're a sissy." We all laughed as I accepted my defeat and said, "I may be a sissy, but I gotta say, that was a really good drink. Thank you." She said, "Come by anytime," and it was one of the warmest welcomes I've ever gotten from walking into a new bar. We stayed for a little longer as we watched the manager make her way around the bar, drink in hand, talking with everyone in the place, and even handing them cash to put into the slot machines. She seemed to be having one hell of a time on a Monday afternoon. Later, we wrapped things up and decided to make our way back to Blake's house. It had been so long since I've gotten to hang out with just Blake and I, much like we used to back when we were both living in Gresham, going on adventures and causing a ruckus. Back then, and now at Blake's new house, we had enough conversation to last us the rest of the evening.
One more time. What do we need? What do we need with business Blake here? We need to make the money to get what now?
I want yachts, and I want to go to the club, and I want to wear nice clothes, and I don't want to have to work. All right, I want to have free time.
Free time for your Lamborghini, right?
Oh, dude, I worked 70 hours fucking too many weeks last year. I want to hang out with my kids, dog. And I'm going to do whatever the fuck I have to do that.
Amen. What did I want to talk about for this trip? The whole idea of our 10-year anniversary. Cheers. Congratulations. Fucking air horns.
Well, I mean, you graduated, bro. I didn't.
I thought you did. I know you weren't there our senior year.
Yeah, I didn't graduate at all. I don't have a high school diploma.
You got the GED, right?
Years later.
Years later.
Yeah.
What? How many years? Because I was hanging out with you around that time. I think I remember you telling me.
I did it when I was in Maryland. So right before we started hanging out.
Oh, so you got it when you were in Maryland. How long did you live in Maryland?
10 months before I got kicked out of Maryland.
Oh, it was only 10 months.
Yeah,
I
didn't leave Maryland willingly. I was exiled from Maryland.
Exiled.
By my family. I could have stayed, but Maryland is not a place you want to be without family. That's for sure. So DMV over on the East Coast means Delaware, Maryland, Virginia. It does not mean Department of Motor Vehicle. Department of Motor Vehicle is a West Coast thing.
Interesting. Actually, I like that cultural difference there.
Yeah, because I used to say, oh yeah, we got to go to the DMV, and my uncle was like,
the what?
We're in the DMV. He was very confused.
That's really cool because like they've got the DMV, we've got the PNW.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah, exactly.
You know, that's where we're at.
But the PNW doesn't stand for any like state. It's just like.
But it's a region.
I think it's a state of being, man.
Up here, yeah, we're in the fucking trees. We're a bunch of fucking hippies. No, what was the other one called?
DMV.
The DMV. Oh, fuck, how could I forget? No, the DMV. Yeah. They're both just regions of neighboring states. That's all it is.
I don't even think the Pacific Northwest would like entail Bend, because Bend is like high desert.
It's in the state that's there.
It's
but
in the state, but it's
Central
not
Eastern Oregon is the desert. Like they have those desert areas.
It's not Pacific though. You know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, it's like, I guess by definition, the state is on the border of said Pacific Ocean. So
I don't think it's about state though, right? I think it's about
region.
It's about region. Right?
If the region where you're at,
the same region.
Yeah, like
different.
Here. I'm not going to stand here in your fucking kitchen and saying I'm in PDX right now. No.
I mean, you say whatever you want, dude. It's a free country, bro. It's America.
Amen. Cheers, brother.
Security guards have no different authority than a private citizen. We are granted no other authority other than the rights granted to every other citizen. We are just willing to walk the line up to our rights and use our rights to try to change what's going on in our communities right now.
Anyone that would hear what you do for a living, I'm sure they would have the same questions of like, what are you allowed to do? What can you do? What can't you do?
Well, I think people hear security guard and they think
Mall cop?
Walmart watcher or fucking Paul Blart. But honestly, like that's very far from what a lot of people are doing these days. It's become a very serious profession. And it's filling a role in society that is much needed to be filled right now.
Yeah.
You know, we're not fixing the problem, but what we're doing is we're keeping people safe from the problem.
Right.
And I can't fix it, you know? It's much deeper than me.
You're one man.
It takes 1 million drops of water in the bucket to consciously change their own decisions, you know?
Yeah.
I got a saying, if you're gonna be an ass and you stick out, you're gonna get spanked.
Got him.
Medical stuff is so necessary, and it's so vast, and it's such a hard topic. And you know, like, I'm not really great at stopping bleeding. They taught me really good at how to start it.
Yeah.
Like, if I have to do medical on you, we're in a really bad day, Ryan. There have been recorded instances where people have been shot multiple times and they complain about the tourniquet.
Could you imagine? I've been shot, but man, this tourniquet hurts.
That's exactly what they fucking say, dude. Yeah, medical is pretty disgusting, dude. It's pretty horrible. Like, the day that I ever have to use it is going to be the worst day of my life and everybody else's life involved. But
holy shit.
But I hope that with what I know, I can help people. But see, here's the thing though. It's like, I get off work at 6 a.m. and I leave work by 6:30. And I'm home by 7. So my kids are awake. So when I get home, I have to change diapers, make breakfast, and then I hang out with them until nap time or until I pass out. Yeah. And then I wake up and I get ready for work and I go back to work.
At what time do you go back?
It doesn't. I usually, well, if I wake up and I have time, I just hang out with my kids until I go to work. Yeah.
Which, I mean, I would do the same thing if I were you, honestly.
I feel guilty, man. I have a lot of dad guilt. Like, I used to be really into hunting, and I just haven't done anything since I've had kids, because if I'm not with my kids, I'm like, I should be at home teaching my kids. Like, I should teach them until they're smart enough to come with me to go do this thing, and then I can show them this thing.
That's what I was just going to say is that, like, ideally you'd want to take them with. That's what my dad and my uncle, they did for us. Me, Dylan, Travis, and Corbin, like, our dads and uncles, we fucking all went out and did that shit together.
We got a full day tomorrow, Ryan. You ready to get painting tomorrow?
Yeah, painting tomorrow. We're going to party tomorrow, man.
Dude, I got a fucking room to paint. We got to paint that room, and then we got to do a second coat in there, brother.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, we got work cut out for us.
It got late enough that I didn't want to drive all the way home, so I decided to stay over and rest up because we had plenty planned for the next day. Tuesday, painting, pizza, playtime. Blake warned me about the sun beaming through the skylight above us, but I actually thought it was a pretty nice way to wake up. I always enjoy the natural light, especially with the overcast skies I'm not so used to seeing down in the desert. We woke up fairly early, probably around 8 or something. Like yesterday, it was nice to get an early start and get the most out of the day. Our main objective for the morning was more painting. We hopped in his truck to go grab coffee for him, snacks for me, and more paint for the house. Originally, I had offered and was totally willing to help Blake paint, but he only had one brush and one roller, so I admit I took the back seat and let Blake work his magic. Don't worry though, like any good DJ, I brought a speaker with me to play music. I even took pictures and filmed a few time lapses. Along the way, Blake also said it seemed to go by a lot faster just having my company compared to him working by himself. He was locked in, finishing the room that he started the day before and finishing another entire room, all before the clock said noon. After some finishing touches, Blake was ready for lunch and he was craving pizza. We ended up going to a place nearby, and I don't know if it was because the pizza was fresh or what, but that was some seriously good quality pizza. I looked at the time, and I told him I should probably drive back home soon to have time to change before our plans to meet up with Blakely and Liz later. He drove us back to the house, and I concluded my unplanned visit to the small town of Almsville as I got in my blue Nissan to drive home. The drive back was just as nice as the drive out. More green, cloudy landscapes, and more stories from the legendary Dave Grohl. I got home with just enough time to change clothes, have a snack, and get back in the car to drive to Oregon City. It wasn't nearly as long of a drive this time, which was good because I wanted to spend as much time as I could with my friends. We almost had the whole gang. Blakely and Liz, Blake and his wife Christina, even their daughter Autumn, who is so much bigger every time I see her. All we were missing was Riley, who unfortunately couldn't make it to Oregon this time around. I parked in downtown Oregon City, and we planned to meet up at Corner 14, where we all met up the first time Riley and I visited after moving. They have all kinds of food carts surrounding the outdoor seating area, and most of the tables come equipped with their own tabletop fireplace. Instead of throwing axes, this time we joined in on some trivia. Blakely and Liz told us how they just did trivia not too long ago, and how they were very competitive. Of course, I already knew that much, after all the game nights they've hosted at their house, plus the many games of beer pong over the years. We had to come up with the team name, and someone suggested 50% Blake because of the two Blakes in our friend group. Then I had the bright idea of doing some math. I counted 2 Blakes out of 5.5 people at the table, young Autumn being the half in this equation, and came up with the team name 36% Blake. Now we were ready to play. The more old fashions I drank, the more haphazard my suggestions got for our answers to the game of trivia. Luckily, Blakely and Liz carried us and kept us in the running. Blake and Christina stuck around as long as they could, but Blake had work the next morning, and they had a bit of a drive ahead of them, so we said our goodbyes, and they were on their way.
I remember in middle school, there was an assembly, and you guys performed a snippet of the play that was happening at that time in middle school. And I remember her because she played some weird character, and she had the long socks that she always wore. And I still remember in high school seeing her walking down the hallways in those long socks, and they were like super stripy, like almost rainbow but not as bright, like autumn colored stripy socks.
That is so cute. That is the cutest thing I've ever heard.
He didn't know we were gonna be together
And married.
Trivia had one last bonus question that had the potential to bring our score up. Based on overall sales in 2022, what were the top 4 sandwich places in the U.S.? The trivia host made a point to exclude your typical burger places, just sandwiches. We had some good guesses right away, but it came down to picking the right ones. We guessed Subway, Jersey Mike's, Jimmy John's, and Firehouse Subs. Apparently our guesses were close, but we completely forgot to mention Arby's at the number 1 spot and Panera. Either way, the trivia host started reading the final scores. One of the top scoring teams left, and you know what they say, you must be present to win. Especially in our case, because we got second place. Our prize? A $15 gift card to the bar, which basically turned into one last round on the house. I even talked to the trivia host afterwards and thanked him for running such a fun game night. Looking at his setup, it looked like something I could run myself. Maybe I've got a new side hustle to figure out. We wrapped up for the evening, and I said one last goodbye to Blakely and Liz, thanking them for getting to spend some quality time with me on this trip. By the time I got home, I was definitely ready for some sleep, and I didn't have anything planned for the next day just yet, so maybe it would be a more relaxing day for the middle of the week. Wednesday, a magnificent spread of simplicity. With any trip home, I always look forward to the food that comes out of our kitchen. Both my mom and my dad each have their particular set of skills, which led to a lot of delicious meals over the years. I should also mention Dylan because he's quite the cook too. My mom mentioned that we had chorizo in the fridge, and I instantly knew I was in for one hell of a breakfast. All we needed was a little prep for some fried potatoes and some seasoning for the chorizo I started cooking. I curiously looked through the spice cupboard, and I asked what kinds of spices they've been using most frequently. My mom showed me the same go-tos we've always used, and she also showed me a handful of new spices they've started using, like this one called Dirt, which was a very robust blend of herbs unlike any seasoning I've ever used. I smelled each one as if I were in a candle shop, trying to soak it all in and memorize each scent. With our meat and potatoes cooked to perfection, I topped things off with some fried eggs, and the whole thing just tasted right. I told my mom, I've made myself chorizo on my own, but it just didn't taste like this. This is what it's supposed to taste like. Having the rental car came in handy once again since I offered to take my mom to a doctor's appointment. Once she was ready, we made our way towards Clackamas. All that overcast weather I'd seen so far now turned into bright blue skies. The clouds were nice, but it finally started to feel like proper June weather. The drive to the doctor's office was like many other drives with my mom in the car, where we would catch up on recent music releases. I dropped her off, and since I had time to kill, I drove down the hill to a nearby Fred Meyer. They definitely don't have those in Vegas, and I was in the mood for a snack. It was another one of those moments that reminded me I was truly in vacation mode because I was in no rush whatsoever. One of the best parts about the whole trip, honestly. I picked my mom up once she was finished, and we stopped at a Dairy Queen on the ride home. It was definitely the right weather for a blizzard, so I was all for it. There was some solid traffic on the way back, so by the time we got home, my dad was done with work, and we started brainstorming ideas for dinner. I mentioned that since I've turned 21 years old, I hadn't actually gone to hang out in the lounge at Giuseppe's. We tossed around a few options while we watched some tennis on TV, but ultimately we decided to go for some Italian with our next happy hour outing. Giuseppe's was another place really close to home, and they had quite a few food options to pick from. I remember my parents talking about the night the Centennial football team won the Mount Hood Conference championship game. I was still in middle school at the time, but I do recall seeing live TV footage on the news of some after party with Dylan and the rest of the football team at some establishment. Turns out it was Giuseppe's, the very place we were sitting in. That was an exciting season for them. They had a solid group of athletes, big guys on the line, talented players in the skill positions. Football games were already exciting to me, but watching that team made those nights even more entertaining. It felt like we ordered a boatload of food. Pizza, salad, antipasto, fried ravioli, fried zucchini, you name it. We indulged until we were filled up, and we went back to the house. The rest of the evening was very relaxed. Dylan and I once again took turns playing Call of Duty, cheering each other on when we made a good play or when we got the win. One of the more ordinary days of being back home, but I welcomed it, especially since the next day was a big one. Thursday. Bridge City. My first thought when I woke up, it's show day. I wouldn't say I exclusively planned this trip around a concert that just so happened to be during the first week of June, but things definitely worked out in my favor. Months prior to this trip, I saw a tour announcement that stopped me in my tracks. It was Buckethead, one of the most bizarre underground artists who wears a white mask and a KFC bucket on his head. I'd seen him twice before, but it had been many years since this man has toured. The last time I saw him was back in 2017. As soon as I saw when tickets were set to go on sale, I texted my oldest friend Lane about the tour. He was the one who went with me to see Buckethead 7 years ago, and it was his first concert ever. I told him I was planning on coming up to Portland anyways, so why not plan to come up there when Buckethead is playing? I think I bought those concert tickets well before I bought any plane tickets or anything else. So my plans were set for later. Once Lane was done with work, him and I would meet up in downtown Portland to hang out before the show. Before all that went down, I had another goal for the earlier part of the day. I was looking for a good time to go see some of my old coworkers from my Portland Parks and Recreation family while I was in town. And this morning was the perfect chance to drive out and say hi. I texted my old boss, Kim, and she said she was working at Southwest Community Center, which is over in, you guessed it, Southwest Portland. Another sunny, blue skies drive for me, and boy, I'm glad I left in the morning because traffic could have been a lot worse. As I approached the front of the building, I started to wonder, had I been to this community center before? Then as soon as I turned into the parking lot, it hit me. Oh yeah, I've been here before. The last time I was here, it was for a meeting early in the summer just before I started as an assistant manager for Pier Pool way up in St. John's. Not too long before I moved to Vegas, actually. I made my way inside and found the manager's office, and I was greeted by John, who I'd worked with at my main pool, East Portland Community Center, up until I moved. He is a great guy and always fun to talk to, so it was refreshing to see him. We caught up for a bit before Kim walked in and gave me a big hug. After working with her for several years and not seeing her since I moved, she was super welcoming. She even brought me some homemade bread someone from the office had made, and it was very tasty. Kim, John, and I all had plenty to catch up on. They had questions about the pools I worked at in Vegas, and I had questions about how things have been in Portland since I've left. Sure, you could say we were discussing business, which is part of the reason I wanted to chat, but I was also genuinely curious about all the people still working in aquatics. What really came in handy was this piece of paper that my dad gave me earlier in the week. It read, Aquatics Family Tree, and it listed who was working at which facility all over the city. Especially helpful since a lot of the managers typically get moved around when summer starts and the outdoor pools open. We talked for a while in the office, then Kim gave me a little tour around Southwest. She even hooked me up with this bright yellow and blue lanyard that says, Head Guard. It was nice to look around since I hadn't really been to that pool very often. We chatted for a while longer in the office that is very cozy, by the way, and Kim insisted that I come back and work for them again. I told her I'd love to, and that I'll stay in touch either way. Time had passed by pretty quickly, and I knew my little pool tour wouldn't be complete without a visit to my old stomping grounds, East Portland. I pulled into the parking lot and even got to park in my go-to spot right in the front, where I'd almost always park since I usually worked the opening shift at 5 in the morning. Before I even walked inside, I couldn't help but notice how picturesque the entrance looked, as it usually did this time of year. The grass was cut and edged perfectly, and the green trees looked like they had grown so much since I'd seen them last. This place is incredibly nostalgic for many reasons. My first workplace, working there for 10 years, and we even had our high school grad party there. Walking down the long hallway towards the pool, it did feel nostalgic, but at the same time, it also felt like I never left. After all, the day of my last shift there before I moved, my old boss Jamie said, "We'll see you when you get back." I knocked on the door to the aquatics office, and there was Jamie. I said, "Surprise!" We talked about some similar topics as I did with Kim, and Jamie also advised me to keep them in the loop if I had any plans to come back for work in Portland. She had a meeting to get to, so I took a short walk around the pool deck for old time's sake, and realizing what time it was, I made my way home to get ready for my big outing downtown. I had the perfect idea for my outfit, all black. Can't go wrong with all black, especially to see some badass guitar solos. I left as soon as I was ready, and it was a good thing I did because there was definitely more traffic in the late afternoon to get downtown. The whole ride there, I blasted Buckethead's music, including some of his songs from his latest album, plus some of my favorites that lasted around at least 10 or 12 minutes, if not longer. Eventually, I found my parking spot, and I set out on foot to meet Lane at Shake Shack. I had no idea Portland even had a Shake Shack. He told me he was waiting for me there, and I looked around for the very familiar face I had grown up with since elementary school. I saw what looked to be him from a distance, but I could tell it was him for sure when he spotted me. The dude grew his hair out, longer than I had ever seen on him. We went inside to chat and get some food before the show. We caught up about work, family, vacations, video games, and much more. After we finished our food, we still had plenty of time to kill, so we took a nice, leisurely stroll through some different streets of downtown. We got closer to the venue, but I noticed a staircase that looked like an open invitation begging to be investigated, so I started down the steps with no hesitation. We didn't need to be there as soon as the doors open, right? Down below was an underground bar, a small room with an old vintage look to it. For a moment, there was no one in the room and no one behind the bar, and we wondered maybe this place just opened for the night. Not long after, a bartender comes out to greet us. I ordered a whiskey, and Lane ordered a cider. It was a very Portland type of place in my mind, with so much character in the rough around the edges sort of way. It was the type of bar you really don't see very often in Vegas, where everything is usually very polished and pristine. As we were looking at the array of books on the bookshelf behind me, a couple came down the steps to order some beer. I knew right away they were also going to the show because the man had a KFC bucket on his head. Somehow, this being my third time seeing Buckethead, I still forgot to wear a bucket of my own. I think my parents even bought KFC a few nights ago. Speaking of which, it was now time to head over to the venue, one that I always thought was pretty cool, the Crystal Ballroom. The past two occasions I saw Buckethead were at a place called Revolution Hall, also a cool venue, but Crystal Ballroom seemed much bigger in comparison, and that had me excited. We approach the doors, and Lane is getting his ticket ready on his phone when I realize, oh shoot, my ticket's in will call. This ended up working in my favor though. I actually got a physical print of my ticket, which I'm always a huge fan of because it seems less and less common these days. While I was at the box office though, I talked to security to make sure we hopped in the right line, and I also snagged a picture of a sign on the door with some pretty important information. Times for set number 1, an intermission, and set number 2. With my ticket in hand, we went to go find the end of the line. We walked around one side of the building and over halfway down the next side. The event info said the doors were set to open at 6, but for whatever reason, I don't think the doors opened till about 6:45. During that time, we watched the line grow and grow until it may have wrapped all the way around the block. We could tell when the doors finally opened with the collective "Hey!" from those ahead of us in line. The crowd filed inside, and I noticed it was a variety of age groups wearing a lot of black t-shirts with guitars or other metal bands on them. Not to mention the handful of fans also wearing KFC buckets on their heads. As we walked onto the concert floor, it was the brightest I'd ever seen the room. Not from the overhead lights, but from all this natural light pouring through the tall windows in the left side of the room. If you haven't been to the Crystal Ballroom before, its design is pretty unique. The venue is over 100 years old, and the floor has this distinct bounce to it. For the layout, the stage is positioned in the corner of the room, with the main floor split in the middle, the left side for all ages, and the right side for 21 and over. We walked into the left side and got pretty close to the stage. One thing about seeing Buckethead, there was never any openers. Once he walked out on stage, it was straight to the main event. Buckethead himself was wearing two jackets, one that had a hood over his head, and his long curly hair came down from what looked like two KFC buckets on the top of his head. He also wore a plain white mask that he normally always wears, which even now I've never seen what this man looks like. A true masked musician, making his underground and abstract style that much more authentic. I don't know how he managed wearing all that though. I would have been sweating. Buckethead showcased his legendary skill on the guitar with a ton of effects at his disposal, some of which made his signature white Gibson Les Paul sound like a straight-up laser beam. The show also welcomed a bassist and a drummer to add more layers into the performance. Early into his first set, there were still rays of light coming through the window aimed towards the stage as the sun was setting outside. I basically told Lane, wouldn't it be so cool if he started playing and the light shined on his guitar? And that's exactly what happened. It could have been a coincidence, but it's almost as if Buckethead noticed the sunlight and actually leaned into it to make his stage presence that much more epic. The rest of the first set flew by, and being on the left side of the room where the speakers are, Lane and I realized our ears were destroyed. Lane went to grab some water, and I went to the bar to grab a vodka Red Bull. We ultimately decided to hang back on the 21 plus side for the second half of the show, and before long, the music started up again. The past couple times I had seen Buckethead, there were no vocals whatsoever. But to my surprise, the group started up a cover of War Pigs by Black Sabbath, and the drummer started singing. The rest of the crowd, myself included, all sang in unison to the vocals originally from a young Ozzy. It was super cool to see one of my favorite guitarists cover a song I was so familiar with, and it's always a treat to hear him play his hit Soothsayer live, which he did that night as well. Halfway through the second set, he took a quick break, like he did the last time I saw him, to bring out his big goodie bag to hand out gifts to the front row. From what we saw, it seemed like he just went down the toy aisle and got loads of action figures, rubber chickens, and various little trinkets. They played some more, and once the last song was over, that was it. The crowd chanted for an encore, but there was indeed no encore. Lane and I took this chance to beat the majority of the crowd out of the venue. We walked back towards where we met up, and I thanked him for coming out to the show and getting to catch up after all the time that had passed. We parted ways, but I didn't quite feel like rushing home just yet. I also had to use the restroom, so I walked into a random bar across the street from Shake Shack. Pretty small place, but it was also pretty lively inside. I thought a lemon drop sounded yummy for a little nightcap, and this couple sat down next to me at the bar. They had also come from the Crystal Ballroom, and they said it was their first time seeing Buckethead. So we got to chatting for a little while about what we thought of the show, the last couple times I've seen Buckethead, different venues in Portland, and other bands in general. They left for their ride, and I decided it was time for me to head home as well. The whole drive home was filled with more of Buckethead's music. Now, I listened on Spotify, and sometimes I run into the issue where certain albums and whatnot are unavailable on the platform. This was the case with a lot of Buckethead's music, until I checked his discography once more that day. Thanks to Lane reminding me, I found that they finally have this amazing album by the name of Electric Sea available to stream, where it definitely wasn't before. That album is one of my favorites, so I was very happy to be able to hear it again. I got home fairly late, but it wasn't necessarily bedtime yet. I scrolled through Netflix, and I remembered I had started the roast of Tom Brady earlier that week, so I thought, okay, I'll watch a little bit more. I put it on, kept watching as I lost track of time, and I unintentionally watched the rest of it. I know it was previously aired live, but damn, that was a long show. It was hilarious how blatant and obvious it was that the later it got at that event, the more intoxicated everyone on stage was getting. Especially Kevin Hart and Rob Gronkowski. Holy moly. It was about 3 a.m. by the time I finished watching that, so I was definitely ready to crash for the night. Friday. Once an eagle, always an eagle. There's no greater feeling than sleeping in the day after going out to a concert. I felt nice and rested, and since I was approaching the latter few days of this trip, I pulled out my laptop to journal some of my experiences so far. This is basically when this whole project idea came into reality. I turned on some lo-fi music in the background and typed my way through my first day of my trip. I like to look at my word counts, and pretty soon I was already well over 1,000 words, so I thought, what if I do this for each of the days I'm here? After having some leftover Chinese food, I decided it was time to go for a very nostalgic walk to my old high school. I was always a fan of living within walking distance of school. Sure, it was tough some mornings when it was cold, raining, or both, but it was also nice to have time to myself where I could mentally prepare myself for the day, reflect, all while listening to music and maybe even singing along. I walked the same route I normally would to get to school, catching a few Pokemon on the way, of course. Nostalgia wasn't the only reason I wanted to go see the school for myself. I had seen posts on Facebook about some upgrades they had done to the football field and the track, so I told myself, next time I'm up in Portland, I want to go see it for myself. Apparently, this included the tennis courts as well. I don't know when they got their little makeover, but it looked great. What I really came to see was the track that was now bright blue instead of black, and walk on the field now made with artificial turf instead of grass.
This is one of my favorite places for how calm it is. This is one of those places that it always makes me feel like I'm at home. And since I've been living in the desert, I look out to this view, all these trees, is amazing. I used to come here for runs if I was ever bored, especially once summer came. It was a little bit warmer. I would come out here and do a jog, go up and down the stairs, run laps around the track, and then run up to the practice fields and get a good workout. And the bleachers, they're still red. I helped paint them red. Me and the water polo team one year. You can see the chips in the paint by now, but it still matches for the most part. But these old benches are still here. These weathered benches I used to come hang out every day almost when I was done with my classes. I think about this place a lot. A friend of mine and I, we'd come out here. She also had those free periods, but we'd come hang out and just talk, vent, get anything we needed to off our chest. And I fondly remember one day when it suddenly rained. We quite literally got caught in the rain and we booked it back towards the high school. It was a long run. She took off and I took off after her, and it rained so hard. I had no hood or anything to protect me but my backpack. I raised it over my head and ran as fast as I could to get to where it was dry. Yeah, I'd give anything just to spend 5 minutes up in that skybox. So maybe one day. If anybody knows anybody, hook me up. Let me come take a selfie up there, take some pictures. But I can confirm this field looks dope. If you went to school here at Centennial High School and you haven't seen this for yourself, come check it out. It's pretty sweet. This is where we would come to just not only reminisce, but gaze forward into the unknown. When we were in middle school, we looked forward while sitting up here in these bleachers, thinking, high school? What the hell's that gonna be like? Then we'd come up here while we were in high school and think, what's college gonna be like? Or what is life going to be like after this? What's next? And after high school and even after college or during college, I would come up here since I lived so close. And I'd come up here and I'd look forward and kind of think the same thing. What is next?
Being there and seeing it for myself was surreal, and it felt special. I walked all around the school grounds and was reminded of all the little moments I experienced there from my young teenage years and beyond. It really did feel like my backyard. I walked home, and when I got there, I made the joke to my parents, "Hi, I'm home from school." I only intended on sitting down for a minute to cool off after getting all sweaty on the walk home, but then I got into watching a really good game of tennis. It was the semifinal for the French Open, after all. We then came up with a plan to go out to Skyland Pub in Troutdale, just down the street from Mount Hood Community College. I always enjoyed going there, and while they used to have shuffleboard, my dad told me they took it out and replaced it with air hockey. A nice upgrade, I'd say. We had some drinks, ordered some food, and we got on a roll talking about some of our all-time favorite movies, which also led to some examples of movies where my parents would ask, "Oh, you've never seen this movie before? Oh, you gotta watch that." Air hockey was a blast. Pool is fun and all, but I honestly wish that more bars had air hockey. All of us, except for my dad, were ready to find another place to go. Dylan brought up us going to see a movie, but I had very little interest in going to the theater to see Bad Boys. He also brought up going to Edgefield, which sounded great since I hadn't been in a very long time, probably since my 22nd birthday. We went to the downstairs pool hall, which I had been to before. It's a very warm and cozy vibe with lots of pool tables, darts, a couple pinball machines, and an old school jukebox. We each got a drink, and we grabbed some darts to play a game of 501. I was off to a great lead almost the entire game, until I got stuck at the end, which usually happens to me when I play darts. Dylan eventually caught up to me and scored for the win. We left Edgefield, and my mom had one more stop for us on the way home. We pulled in to park in the same lot as our local Taco Bell, and I asked, "Where are we going again?" They took me to a little hole-in-the-wall bar named Platinum Pub, and my mom took us there because she happened to be friends with the bartender. Right when we walked in, he not only recognized her, but he also recognized me and Dylan. He said the last time he saw me, I was a lot smaller, so since I didn't really remember him very well, I must have been a small child back then. We told him I was visiting from Vegas, and like most, he gave us some of his stories from visiting Vegas in the past. It was a nice visit, and it was a very short drive home. To wind down for the night, Dylan wanted to put on a movie, and he picked the new Godzilla and Kong. I won't lie, it was not my favorite. Granted, I was tired, so there were moments where I had trouble focusing on the slower parts, but from what I saw, I was not impressed. If you want a good Godzilla movie, go watch -1. It's hands down the best Godzilla movie I've ever seen. While we're watching the movie, my mom is in the kitchen making cookies at almost midnight for whatever reason. I was not complaining though, because it doesn't get any better than fresh, home-baked cookies still warm from the oven. I think Dylan was trying to stay up late to maintain his sleep schedule, because after we finished Godzilla and Kong, Dylan put on a Kevin Hart movie I hadn't even heard of at the time. This one had John Travolta in it, and I don't know if it was because I was tired and delirious or not, but I thought it was pretty funny. From what I watched at least, because my eyes were getting extremely heavy, telling me it was time for bed. Saturday. Super happy fun times. I woke up with plans in mind for my second to last day in town. I arranged to hang out with my good friend Billy at his place. Originally, my understanding was that his place was in Milwaukee, but to make sure, I asked him for his address. I put it into the map, and it says 9 minutes from my house. Of course, Milwaukee wouldn't have been that far, but I was definitely glad to see that he was basically down the street from me. I made myself some breakfast, got myself ready, and made my way over. I knew I was in the right place when I saw a skeleton wearing a full outfit and a beanie sitting in a chair on the front porch. Billy welcomed me inside and gave me the grand tour of his new place. He and his roommates had only been living there for a short time, but right off the bat, I was impressed with the look of the place. He had tons of art on the walls, on the shelves, and his DVD collection had some of my favorite movies. Great taste, as usual. I was also greeted by a cat named Volley, a fluffy orange goofball who's named after one of the sons of Odin, known as the god of vengeance. Apparently, this Norse god of vengeance is even bigger than our cat Static, and if Static weighs as much as a watermelon, Volley must be heavier than a Costco pumpkin. We caught up for a bit, and he mentioned that he had Mortal Kombat installed on his PlayStation, so I told him I would happily challenge him to some fights. It had been a while since either of us had played Mortal Kombat 10, but it was one we each used to play a lot back in the day. We had some pretty close games, so once I realized things were heating up, I removed the hoodie I wore to reveal my Mortal Kombat t-shirt. Total coincidence, I swear. We got our fix on Mortal Kombat, and I gave Riley a video call, that way she could join in virtually and chat with Billy for a little while. Afterwards, we started brainstorming some sort of game plan for the rest of the day. The best part, though, was not having any time constraints whatsoever, and really having the freedom to soak up the rest of my last full day in town, no matter what we did. We chose Dairy Queen for lunch, which was funny since it was the same Dairy Queen my mom and I had stopped at earlier that week. Along the way, Billy filled me in on how he got to his current living situation and explained a little bit about what his roommates were doing for work. We got back and talked about video games like Cyberpunk and the Far Cry series while he put Family Guy on the TV in the background. He also introduced me to this oversized bong they named Shogun and offered for me to try it out. I was intrigued since I had never hit such a tall piece before, but needless to say, I was very relaxed for the rest of the day. Later that afternoon, Billy's brother Matt came home from work and hung out with us. I was telling them a little bit about my Toyota RAV4, and needless to say, these two definitely know a thing or two about cars.
Like, as long as you don't have to take it to Jiffy Lube or something, you know? Yeah, no. Never do that. No, I take it to my Jiffy. I know this is being recorded, and I'm going to go on record as officially saying, fuck Jiffy Lube, don't go there. I still tell people to go fuck themselves at Jiffy Lube. Oh, yeah.
I'll tell people, they'll be like, I took my car to Jiffy Lube. I'm like, okay, so that's why we have the issues you're having right now.
Yeah, it's like you're
I didn't
they have
this.
Jiffy Lube has there was a whole Vice program where one of the Vice reporters went to Jiffy Lube and secretly recorded them and showed them walking past the vehicle swapping out oil filters.
How prevalent is it when it comes to auto body work, automobiles and stuff, that people fuck something up? You know, you go in expecting this job, and how many mechanics are out there like, oh, oops, I had to like move this part around, like fuck something up, but I hope they don't notice, or they don't know shit about cars. So
70%.
Really? Do you think
minimum.
They get away with stuff like that?
70% of mechanics are fucking rats. Yeah, it's more important to find a mechanic that you can really trust than it is to find or harder to find a mechanic that you can really trust than it is to find even like a dentist or a doctor in most cases.
Trust as in they're gonna do quality work, or that
trust as in they're not going to
up?
A little bit of both. Well, okay, trust as in, so quality work and not fucking things up go hand in hand in my eyes. But it's really about, how much do you trust them to do the job correctly and not mess up with other things in your vehicle? And how much do you trust them to be honest with you and not oversell things you don't need? Because
never gotten any work done in a city that was good work.
I'll tell you this much. I know a lot of shops that they make a living off of selling things to people that they don't need. Where you'll go into that shop and you'll say, I need an oil change, and you'll walk away because they were like, no, you have to get this belt, this 4 hours of labor, these tires. And they'll upcharge all of those things because they desperately need to make money off that. Yeah. Because that is kind of the way it works. In order to make a living as a mechanic or to support a shop, the majority of the money from that, because labor goes into paying your guys. The money for the shop, as far as paying the lights and oil and outcome of parts and shit like that, comes from upselling the part itself. So if somebody buys an alternator, the shop will buy an alternator and install it in your car, right? They're going to quote you $300 for that. That's what, $120 for an alternator, and then $100 of labor, and they're going to mark up that alternator to about $180 so that they can make ends meet. Right. And so that's how it usually starts. You'll find guys like my dad, who he's like, I will never recommend service to somebody that I would not think to do for myself. Yeah. If he's working on somebody's car and he goes, hey, these brakes are lower than I would like, then he'll let them know, hey, your brakes are getting there. You don't need to do them now, but be aware that they might start feeling weird down the road. And if they do, if you start to notice anything, I would get them done right away. And he'll recommend other shops that he trusts, Yeah. But at the same time, there's other guys in the same town with the same name, funny enough, that are phenomenal businessmen that make a lot more money and have multiple locations and stuff. But their whole prerogative is this vehicle comes in, leaves as soon as possible with as much work done on it as I could get my guys to sell. As opposed to my dad is like, he'll do one vehicle in a day. He'll spend 2 days doing a 6-hour job because he's a one-man shop doing his own thing. But because of the work it was, he was able to upcharge 10% on $1,000 worth of parts. Does $1,100 worth of parts then. It takes him, gets to charge $400 worth of labor. All said and done at the end of the day, because he barely has to pitch in anything because he's sharing a shop space and doesn't have all these employees to pay or benefit programs or workman's comp, insurance, doesn't have to worry about any of that. So he gets to walk away and say, cool as shit, I worked 6 hours and made $500. I'm Elon Musk in this bitch. He don't, as far as he's concerned, that's top notch. Walks out of a week with $2.5 grand and he's like, I'm fucking killing it. Because he doesn't have to worry about all the other stuff. But as soon as you end up with employees and overhead and rental space and all of that, a lot of shops are pressed into a position where they have to upcharge the shit out of things. Right. So then they start pressing.
So I'm going to sell you an entire catalytic converter. With
exactly.
Sensors all the way down.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a $250 job. Turn into
But what they're deciding to swap that with, that is inevitably more expensive to support their business, is that actually doing your car a favor?
No.
Not typically, no, because what they would normally need to do is just to
Sometimes they don't
replace.
even replace
So
parts.
let's take the oxygen sensor. Well, that's like Jiffy Lube stuff, which there is reports of the Jiffy Lube school telling people how to fuck people over. I don't know how true that is, but I just don't go. I tell everybody, don't go near Jiffy Lube. There's a record there. Same thing with Lath's in Gresham in Portland. Lath's Auto Body and Collision Repair. They have a F with the Better Business Bureau. The reason that they run those ads so often is because they can only live off of new customers because they screw over almost everybody that goes through.
So they go all
I know
marketing.
so many
Because
people.
Rob's Subaru on Mount Hood, he'll park your car out if you don't pay him right then and there.
Yeah, if you don't pay right on time for some shops, they're like, well, legally we own your vehicle until you do, and they'll start selling off parts.
Jeep West will install mods on your Jeep that you did not want.
Yeah.
And then when you come in to pay for your oil change, they'll be like, okay, yeah, so we put a turbo on it.
What the hell?
So you owe us $3,000. I don't have $3,000. Well, that's ours now.
I know a guy that literally had to hold them at gunpoint to get them to get his Jeep out of the shop.
Allegedly.
Allegedly.
Like, you know, we
Mechanics are the biggest
and
bitches you'll ever
poetically,
meet in your life.
we poetically like to refer to women as flowers and being fragile creatures and stuff. But when it comes to cars and like construction around the home, dudes become the most fragile fucking little lilies I've ever seen in my life, man. I've seen some fucking veterans in the game, like crotchety old men that are like, oh, you need to toughen up, you need to get better, you know, blah, 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 whatever, boomer talk, all of this silent generation shit. And next thing you know, they're literally screaming and throwing tools, breaking their own shit, blowing out windows in their own shop, throwing a temper tantrum. And it's like, I'm sorry, I know you really want to see me become this dude that you have envisioned for what a man should be, but it's really fucking hard to take somebody seriously when they're throwing a temper tantrum at 55 years old.
I asked them, do you guys have a deck of cards? They found me a deck, and I thought it might be fun to show them a card game my family taught me called 31. We played a practice round so that I could show them the basics. I told them that normally we would each have 3 quarters, but if not, then 3 tokens of some kind would do just fine. Instead of quarters, Billy brings out a box of handgun ammo, and we all got 3 rounds each. I thought this was hilarious, and it only made for a funnier time playing this game, since the loser of each round has to put in one of their tokens, and the winner takes all. I also told them how I usually see beginner's luck pretty often when I show this game to people for the first time. Unfortunately, this was not the case for Billy. The poor guy lost every single game he played, even after Matt and I donated one of our rounds each to him. Maybe I'll convince him to redeem himself next time I'm up there. Billy invited a friend of his over, and his roommate Keenan came home from work with his dog Pocky. Apparently, those two are a package deal. They go just about everywhere together, and Keenan says she's basically his daughter. Very friendly dog that he explained as all kinds of shepherd. Going into this particular weekend, Billy had the idea of throwing a full-blown party, but due to some circumstances, he decided to forego inviting as many people as he had planned. Either way, though, it was still a great time. The living room and kitchen felt lively. We were pouring some Pendleton and Bullet. Keenan even had this device that looked and functioned like a hookah, but it was vaporizing this strain of weed called Volcano Hybrid, and it was incredibly smooth. After everything I had done this week, all the places I had been, getting to simply hang out and relax with some great company was the perfect way to spend my Saturday. Altogether, I think I was at Billy's for like 12 hours that day, so thanks again for letting me linger. By the end of my visit, I will say my social battery had felt drained, but in a good way. I don't get a lot of that social interaction in Vegas, outside of work, of course. So coming back home just to visit felt like a flood of conversation and good times. Sunday. Last minute memories. It was the official last day of my trip, which also meant it was time to return the bright blue Nissan. My dad followed me so I could return the rental car, and we went for a few errands before going back home. We picked up some heavenly donuts, then we went over to his shop once again. 2 people from his crew were there, so my dad introduced me, telling them how I used to work for the city over at the pools. He watered some of their plants, and once he had what he needed, we started to head home. The nice part was that my dad decided to take Marine Drive to head back, which is always a great photo-video opportunity to drive by the river on a sunny day. Back at home, I took some time to chat with my parents while the tennis final was on TV, and I told them it would be nice to go say hi to Grandma while I'm still here. We arranged a time to go visit a little later, then I went to make sure I was all packed. There were also a few goodies I was hoping to bring back with me, like a tennis racket, some racquetball gear, and I couldn't forget my Pikachu onesie. My mom was helping me find an extra bag to take with me when I realized there was another important thing I had put off on this trip, and that was looking through my box of memorabilia. This box was set aside, filled with papers and other random items, all designed to bring me back in time. We're talking about stuff not only from high school, but middle school and earlier too. I found things I remembered putting in the box, like festival wristbands and concert tickets. But I also came across things that made me think, why did I keep this, like a plastic bag of confetti from who knows where? My main priority, though, was opening my letter to myself I had written 10 years ago during the last week of high school. I found the package it was in, a red folder with a collage of white paper glued all over the place that had messages for me about what I learned in high school, advice to others, and some of my favorite things at the time. I really enjoyed reading the bucket list I had made, since I was able to check off some of those things after these last 10 years. As for the letter itself, it had a lot more content from the present in 2014, which acted much more like a window into the past, rather than me writing to my future self. I had found my middle school letter to myself as well, and I think I did a better job with that one because I asked a lot more questions to my future self. I hardly made a dent in this box of memories when Dylan came in for some last-minute trades on Pokemon Go before he headed out to work his long, odd hours at the jail. My mom went to take a picture of us because she noticed that we were wearing almost identical maroon-colored t-shirts, except mine had Mickey Mouse on it, of course. I went back to my box for just a little longer before I realized there's a lot of stuff in here. Because I didn't have a ton of time left and I didn't want to rush, I decided to wait until my next trip to fully dive back into this array of keepsakes. Thankfully, my grandma was staying at a home just down the street from us, so my dad took me over there to say hi. When we arrived, they had just finished dinner and my grandma was very happy to see us. She offered for us to step outside into the courtyard, where they had walkways and some colorful roses planted. Even though it ended up being a short visit, it felt nice to see my grandma since it had been a while for me. And just in time, too. I always try to pick my returning flights as late as possible so I can make the most out of any trip, but I still needed to run home and gather my things so I could make it to the airport a little bit early. My mom offered to grab me any snacks I wanted for the flight, and as I was looking around the kitchen, I opened up the spice cabinet one more time to take another look. Then my mom asked me if I wanted to take any seasonings home with me, and I was way too excited. She hooked me up with some stuff I've never cooked with before, and they even had extra spices that hadn't even been opened yet. So I stashed these last-minute jars of seasonings into my luggage, and I said goodbye as I loaded my suitcase into my dad's truck, ready to head to PDX and back to Vegas. As I boarded the plane, they said it was a pretty empty flight, so I was able to snag a window seat. We took off, and I was treated to an incredible sunset over one last look at Portland. For now, at least. Wow. Well, if you've listened this far, thank you so much, and I will see you next time.